Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the strangest, sleepiest chapters of human history, the Victorian era specifically, the part where parents casually gave their children opium. Yes, opium, the same substance modern medicine keeps locked behind 7 layers of regulations and a pharmacist named Brenda. Back then, it was sold next to cough drops. So before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, turn on a fan for that gentle white noise. Get cozy under blankets that, thankfully, do not contain horsehair stuffing, and prepare yourself. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what Victorian medicine actually felt like? What was it like to be a parent relying on a syrup that was essentially 40% morphine and 60% vibes? Did kids just float through childhood like tiny, confused ghosts? What did babies even cry about if the cure was a teaspoon of "please don't wake me until spring"? Would you survive Victorian parenting culture, or would you give your toddler laudanum flavored with cherries and call it a day? And why did anyone think opium candy was a normal stocking stuffer? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1872. You're in a narrow London row house. The wallpaper is peeling. Your landlord is morally allergic to repairs. And someone is boiling cabbage for the 4th day in a row. A baby is crying upstairs. But don't worry, you've got something in the cupboard that will take care of that. It's called opium. And you're about to find out exactly why Victorian children slept so well, maybe too well. You blink into existence on a lumpy straw mattress that smells like humidity and someone else's regrets. There's frost on the inside of the window. The wallpaper is trying to escape the wall, and the room is so cold you briefly wonder if you've died and woken up in a poorly insulated afterlife. Welcome to 1872. Let's start with the obvious. Comfort is not on the menu. Your mattress is a relic, stuffed with straw, lumps, the occasional pebble, and, for variety, a colony of enthusiastic bedbugs. The blanket on top is a single scratchy sheet of wool, woven by someone who apparently specialized in the sensation of despair. Your pillow is not so much a pillow as a suggestion, flat, lumpy, and about as supportive as a passive-aggressive roommate. The air in the bedroom has a certain flavor to it, a mixture of lingering coal smoke, stale cabbage from last night's dinner, and something you pray is just damp plaster. Your breath rises in little puffs, condensing on the window in patterns that look like Morse code for help. The fire in the grate went out hours ago, and it wasn't doing much to begin with. You think longingly of central heating, a luxury that won't exist for at least another 100 years and will be invented by someone probably tired of waking up like a frozen burrito. Your clothes are not nearby because there's no closet. Instead, there's a rickety wooden chair that you share with every draft in the house. You eye your trousers, now somehow colder than the glass of water on the nightstand, and make a mental note to invent fleece. As you reach for them, you realize your feet have already gone numb, and your toes have formed a tight-knit support group dedicated to getting through another Victorian winter. Victorian bedrooms are designed less for relaxation and more for character building. The wallpaper, once a cheerful floral, now more of a peeling mold cheek, is slowly detaching from the walls, weighed down by years of humidity and the chemical joy of arsenic-based dye. Yes, the very wallpaper is trying to murder you. But don't take it personally. In 1872, everything in the house is mildly out to get you. If you're lucky, the bed is yours alone. If not, you're sharing it with siblings, cousins, or the occasional mysterious draft that seems to have a personal vendetta against your comfort. Privacy is a rumor. Your entire family may be in the same room, snoring in harmony, while someone's feet are inescapably in your face. The floorboards are cold and creak with every step. which is convenient if you want everyone to know you're awake, and disastrous if you ever want to sneak downstairs for a midnight snack. If you do manage to make it out of bed, your morning shuffle involves dodging chamber pots, Victorian indoor plumbing's humble, sloshing ancestor, and trying not to stub your toes on the only sturdy thing in the room. The one chair that was built to survive a small war. You glance at the window, which is frosted over from your own breath and the collective effort of every coal fire in the neighborhood. Outside, you can just make out the shadowy outlines of laundry lines, sooty chimneys, and the occasional passing horse, which looks as grumpy about the weather as you feel. And yet, this is normal. This is peak domestic comfort in 1872. You survived the night. Sort of, and for that, the Victorians would say you've done well. Take a second to congratulate yourself. You are officially awake, upright, and only mildly traumatized by cold. Now, let's move on to the real challenge. Finding a reason to get out from under your 3-pound woolen blanket. Spoiler, it involves breakfast that's only marginally warmer than your toes. Time to begin the day, Victorian style. Good luck. You take your first morning inhale and immediately regret everything. Victorian air isn't really air. It's a blend of soot, chimney smoke, horse fumes, and whatever your neighbor burned last night that definitely wasn't legally classified as fuel. Every breath feels like someone's run a dusty carpet through your lungs. Then finished things off with a light spritz of boiled cabbage. You pull your scratchy blanket closer, trying to convince yourself you're still dreaming, but no, you're wide awake, hacking softly and realizing that the London fog everyone talks about is just weather's way of saying smoke alarm. You can practically taste the century on your tongue. A delicate bouquet of old boots, coal tar, and hope that's been through a ringer. Outside, the world is waking up. But waking up in Victorian England mostly means starting to burn stuff. Every chimney is alive, belching out black plumes with the unashamed enthusiasm of a Victorian novelist turning in chapters by the pound. Some houses burn coal, others burn wood, and at least one neighbor has found a way to turn leftover shoes into fuel. Nobody's judging. There are exactly 2 heating options in 1872. Shivering or atmospheric carcinogens. The street outside your window is a symphony of noises, horse hooves clopping, newspaper boys shouting, someone coughing up a Victorian lung, and the never-ending rattle of wagons over cobblestone. There's a brief moment of hope as you crack the window for fresh air, only to realize that fresh air doesn't exist. It's all just different grades of urban marinade, depending on the wind direction. You start to appreciate why so many people in Victorian London wore those absurdly dramatic scarves and cravats. It's not for fashion. It's because if you didn't cover your face, your teeth would end up the same color as the Thames. Victorian lungs deserve their own museum exhibit, complete with explanatory plaques and a warning about possible black lung from just reading the description. Let's not forget the ever-present bouquet of animal contributions. Horses are the backbone of transportation and also the main supplier of urban street aromas. Your first step outside is a masterclass in dodging fresh piles, each one steamed by the morning chill, giving the city a perfume no candle will ever attempt to imitate. But the real danger isn't the smell, it's the invisible. Tiny flecks of soot settle on your skin, your clothes, your breakfast. By noon, your handkerchief is the color of regret, and your nostrils could pass for small Victorian chimneys. No one escapes the grime. Even the Queen's dresses probably hid a secret layer of city dust. And the only thing more common than bronchitis is pretending you don't have bronchitis. If you're lucky enough to live near a factory, congratulations. Your personal air is now enhanced with a proprietary blend of chemical byproducts. This includes bonus flavors like acidic tang and mystery fog. which the locals refer to simply as Tuesday. If you're especially unlucky, your neighbor might be a tanner or a soap boiler, meaning the occasional wisp of burning animal hides or experimental Victorian detergent. Either way, every day is an olfactory adventure. Health advice in the era is both practical and completely unhinged. Doctors recommend moving to the country for cleaner air. But unless you're part of the aristocracy, your clean air still comes with a side of manure. Most city dwellers cope by simply not talking about it. Respiratory complaints are as common as umbrellas, and both are frequently lost in a stiff breeze. But somehow, everyone keeps going. Kids play hopscotch in the street, pausing only to hack up a lung. Adults head to work, wrapped in scarves and good intentions. You, after a second, third, and fourth tentative breath, resign yourself to the day's flavor profile. Smoked shoe with a hint of cough drop. Take comfort. If you can survive your first Victorian breath, you can survive anything the century throws at you. Besides, your sense of smell should be back by next spring. Next up, breakfast. Spoiler, the air might actually taste better. It's time for breakfast, which is less meal and more industrial hazard. You get a slice of bread so stale it could double as home defense. A smear of something pretending to be butter, and tea strong enough to dissolve moral dilemmas. Let's start with the bread. It's technically food, but also could be classified as masonry. This loaf has been around long enough to have seen several monarchs and possibly survived the Great Fire of London by hiding in a coal bin. Slicing it is less a matter of cutting and more an act of negotiation. The crust is approximately the density of volcanic rock, and the interior, for those brave enough to reach it, is chewy with a hint of yesterday's fog. If you have teeth, you will soon not. If you don't, congratulations. You're already ahead of the curve. Now for the butter, or butter. It arrives on your plate with the consistency of cold spackle and the subtle scent of yesterday's cow. Churned in a kitchen that hasn't seen daylight since the last cholera epidemic, this spread is technically legal, but morally questionable. Sometimes it's actually lard, sometimes margarine, sometimes something no one dares name. It melts only under great duress, and spreads with the elegance of a bricklayer slapping mortar. The only upside? At least it's too bland to go rancid. Your tea, though, is the true star of the meal. Victorian tea is brewed to the strength and opacity of a Victorian coal mine. If you drop a spoon in, you might not see it again until next Tuesday. Milk is optional, but the milk in question has travelled miles in an open cart and may have developed a personality by the time it reaches your table. Sugar, if you're rich, adds sweetness. If you're not, just enjoy the sensation of bitter resolve washing over your soul. If you're hoping for variety, lower your expectations to brown or brown adjacent. Maybe, if you're lucky, there's a little jam, made from last summer's berries, and enough sugar to crystallize your ambitions. More likely, the jam is just yesterday's bread crusts boiled in water with the word fruit whispered over the pot for flavor. And let's not forget the porridge, a bowl of slow-cooked oats, water, and whatever hopes the household had for improvement. Oats are cheaper than flour, so they feature heavily in breakfast and lunch and possibly dinner if things go badly. Eggs are an occasional treat, served boiled, fried, or, if the hen is on strike, simply absent and replaced by another slice of bread. Meat? Dream on. Unless you're upper class, the closest thing you'll see to bacon is the memory of someone talking about bacon. Maybe, if you're lucky, a scrap of leftover ham or salted fish that looks and tastes like an apology. As you eat, the conversation is sparse and practical. Everyone is too busy chewing, surviving, and mentally preparing for the day ahead. You stare down at your breakfast and realize that every ingredient is a calculated risk. Is that a weevil in the bread or just an ambitious seed? Has the butter always had that smell? Or is it developing new life forms? And is the tea supposed to be this bitter? Or is that just a reflection of your own soul trying to escape your body? Yet somehow, this is the best meal of the day. Lunch will be cold, dinner will be whatever didn't rot by midday. And snacks are reserved for the children, who need calories to fuel their busy schedules of sweeping chimneys and questioning the existence of flavor. You finish your meal, teeth slightly loosened and spirits slightly lowered, and wipe your hands on a napkin that doubles as a handkerchief. Breakfast in Victorian England isn't about pleasure, it's about resilience. If you can make it through the morning meal, you can handle anything, even another cup of tea. Now, having completed your daily trial by carbohydrate, it's time to meet the children of the house, already awake, already covered in dirt, and already plotting their escape from oatmeal. Victorian kids wake up early, work long hours, and are somehow already covered in soot before they've even gone outside. They're like tiny coal-powered adults with respiratory issues. Let's set the scene. You're 4 years old, but in Victorian terms, that's basically entry-level employee. You may be small, but you're not here for coddling. Childhood is less a golden era and more a probationary period before you're promoted to survivor. Your hair is stuck at a permanent angle. Your face is streaked with something that could be jam but is more likely coal dust. And your hands look like you moonlight as a chimney sweep, which, fun fact, you probably do. Breakfast barely digested, you're sent out the door with instructions to be useful and don't come back until you've contributed to the GDP. The concept of play is not entirely absent, but it's mostly theoretical. Toys, if you have them, are wooden, lead-painted, and designed to foster creativity through the imminent threat of splinters. More likely, your plaything is a rock, a piece of string, or a sibling with poor reflexes. The jobs available to you are many and varied, none of them what you'd call safe or desirable. Sweep the chimney? You fit, and that's your resume. Work at the mill? You can reach the moving parts, adults can't. Deliver newspapers? Perfect. You're the ideal height to dart between horse carts and possibly be yelled at by someone named Mr. Crumpleton. Matchstick girl, mudlark, shoeblack, errand boy. Victorian society invented more job titles for children than LinkedIn ever will. By the time you're 7, you've probably had more careers than most modern adults. You've navigated tight crawl spaces, hauled water, carried coal, and developed a cough that makes you sound like an elderly sea captain. Wages are minimal, a few coins, maybe a stale bun, and the opportunity to keep working. Unions? Never heard of her. If you're one of the lucky few with access to education, school is a cold, overcrowded room where you memorize multiplication tables while freezing in place and ignoring the child next to you who has brought his family's entire collection of lice for show and tell. School is not a refuge, it's just another obligation sandwiched between chores and more chores. You might leave at noon to help at the market or stay home to mind younger siblings. Victorian childcare's version of raise yourself and don't die. Some children work in factories, where the air is thick with dust and management's main safety policy is try not to lose a limb. The machinery is loud, relentless, and completely unbothered by your tiny, fragile fingers. Others head to the mines, lantern in hand, knowing full well the only thing darker than the coal shaft is the future prospects for a child miner. Cleanliness is a fantasy. You start the day smudged and finish it grimy. Baths are rare, soap is rarer, and towels are theoretical. A quick wash means splashing some cold water on your face and drying off with the corner of your shirt, which was last washed during a minor political upheaval. Your hair is matted, your nails are basically medieval artifacts. and the only thing that sparkles is your spirit, which, honestly, might just be sleep deprivation. But don't mistake hardship for a lack of ingenuity. Victorian kids are resourceful. You've learned how to dodge angry shopkeepers, bribe a sibling with the promise of half a potato, and spot the least dangerous adult from 50 yards away. You're fluent in the local dialect of street slang, have an internal compass for the nearest bakery, and can run faster than most adults if sufficiently motivated by food, fear, or fun. At the end of the day, you drag yourself home, pockets full of lint, coins, and possibly a frog. You're exhausted but satisfied. You survived, you hustled, and maybe, if you're lucky, tomorrow you'll graduate from small and dirty to slightly taller and still dirty. And that's the life of a Victorian child. No childhood innocence, but plenty of experience. Now, as you collapse onto your straw mattress, the sun setting behind the smog, you can rest easy. At least until someone wakes you up at dawn for another shift. Next up, the sound of a baby crying, and how Victorians decided to solve that problem. You hear a baby crying. The mother sighs, reaches for a bottle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, and gives the child a dose that would tranquilize a modern rhinoceros. Silence falls. Victory, Victorian style. To modern ears, this sounds alarming. To Victorians, it's Tuesday. The baby wasn't colicky. He was overstimulated by moonbeams. He didn't have gas. He was teething with excessive enthusiasm. Whatever the diagnosis, the solution was the same. A teaspoon of syrup laced with enough opium to knock out a cavalry regiment. And this wasn't a secret. The ingredients were proudly advertised, pleasant to the taste, absolutely effective. Might cause gentle death, but only in rare and inconvenient cases. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was the gold standard, but it wasn't the only game in town. There was Godfrey's cordial, Dalby's carminative, and a charming little number called Infant's Quietness, which sounds less like a medicine and more like a warning label for Victorian parenting. These were not fringe products. They were sold in general stores, endorsed by doctors, and displayed in medicine cabinets next to things like arsenic toothpaste and cocaine toothache drops. Parenting was creative. You, a concerned Victorian adult, are just trying to get some sleep, or knit, or wrangle 5 other children and 1 goat into compliance. You love your baby. You want them to thrive, but your house is cold, your hands are raw, and you've just washed laundry with lye, soap, and tears. If a syrup promises to calm your baby and give you 30 minutes of peace, you're going to pour that thing like it's vintage wine. And it worked. Within minutes, the crying stops. The baby sighs softly, eyes fluttering closed, as if visited by a tranquil angel with a pharmacy degree. The mother wipes her brow. The siblings unclench, and everyone goes back to their regularly scheduled Victorian stress. What no one's admitting, because denial is a soothing balm of its own, is that this syrup wasn't just calming, it was sedating. Some babies slept long. Some babies slept a little too long, and yet the habit persisted. Why? Because the alternatives were worse. A baby that cried through the night meant no one slept, tempers flared, chores didn't get done, and someone might threaten to feed the baby to a goat out of sheer sleep deprivation. Opium, in a very dark way, felt merciful. Even in upper-class homes with hired nannies, opiate-laced remedies were common. A governess could calm the nursery in record time with just a few carefully measured drops. And by carefully measured, we of course mean poured freely while muttering prayers. If a child was especially fussy, the dosage increased. No one was tracking milligrams. They were barely tracking the children. And don't forget, This was a time when people thought bad air caused disease, water might kill you, and if your baby got a fever, you'd just rub them with whiskey and hope for the best. The bar for medical caution was subterranean. So when a syrup claimed to soothe teething, pain, and quiet coughs with a pleasant narcotic effect, no one raised an eyebrow. They were too busy raising 8 children and hoping 5 of them made it to adulthood. Eventually, the government caught on. In the early 1900s, regulations began to limit how much morphine you could casually spoon into a baby. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was quietly removed from the shelves, not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. And by too well, we mean it accidentally made Victorian sleep look a little too permanent. But in 1872, that baby is fast asleep. The household is quiet. And for one brief, blissful moment, peace reigns. You don't think about the consequences, because honestly, it's either this or rocking the baby for 4 hours with numb arms and tears in your eyes. Parenting, Victorian style, improvisational, exhausting, and occasionally dosed with laudanum. Now that the baby's asleep, let's take a peek at what else the Victorians were slipping into the candy aisle. Victorian medicine insists that every childhood inconvenience, teething, fussiness, breathing too loudly, can be solved with a little opium. Pediatricians don't exist yet, pharmacists barely do. And yet, parents carry on with an alarming sense of confidence. You, as a concerned 1872 adult, look at your small, squalling offspring and ask yourself the same question your parents asked, and their parents before them. Is this a medical issue or a personality flaw? The answer doesn't matter, because the solution is the same. Find a bottle, pour something syrupy, and hope for silence. There's no doctor, Spock, no mommy blog, no parenting podcast gently advising against medicating your toddler with narcotics. There's just a bottle labeled Infant Calm and a testimonial from someone named Mrs. P, who claims it helped her twins sleep through a thunderstorm, the neighbor's barn fire, and a minor cholera outbreak. Teething? That's an easy fix. No need for rubber rings or chilled spoons. You simply rub a bit of opium tincture on the gums and voila. Instant quiet, mild euphoria, and an expression on your baby's face that says, "I understand the universe now." The child may forget how to blink for the next 3 hours, but at least they're not screaming. Coughing? Laudanum. Restless legs? Laudanum. Bad dreams? Strong opinions? Minor existential crises? Laudanum. Even when the child isn't actively suffering, many Victorian parents administer a preventative dose just in case. This wasn't medicine. It was lifestyle management. The ideal child was quiet, still, and vaguely drowsy at all times, not unlike a cat sunbathing breath after lunch. And this wasn't limited to the working classes. Wealthy families also subscribed to the contain the chaos with chemistry method. Nannies were expected to maintain order in nurseries, and that order often came in liquid form. A particularly active toddler could be tamed with a few drops of syrup in the afternoon, just enough to ensure nap time wasn't a contact sport. Of course, there were side effects. But the Victorians, never ones to admit concern, brushed them off as delicate constitutions or melancholic spirits. If a child became overly quiet, stopped eating, or spent the afternoon staring at the wall with the intensity of a tax auditor, that was just seen as good behavior. Stoicism was fashionable. Emotion was inconvenient. And nothing silenced emotion quite like morphine. The pharmacists, if you could find one that wasn't just a guy with a mustache and a shelf of dusty jars, rarely gave accurate dosing instructions. Measuring spoons weren't standardized, and the term a drop or two could mean anything from a gentle taste to an accidental coma. It was all vibes. Scientific method hadn't fully arrived yet. It was still in the carriage on the way. Home remedies were often even worse. Families would make their own tinctures using opium resin, alcohol, and whatever herbs hadn't wilted yet. The result was a substance that smelled like fermented despair and worked like an emotional off-switch. But hey, at least the baby stopped crying. It's worth remembering that life in 1872 was brutally hard. Parents didn't medicate because they were lazy. They did it because everything else had already failed. There was no maternity leave, no support network, and no therapy except yelling into a pillow. Keeping a child calm meant being able to function. It meant getting the laundry done, the firewood chopped, the food cooked, and maybe, just maybe, sitting down for 5 minutes to remember what silence felt like. And silence, when it finally arrived, was a luxury. So the Victorian parenting philosophy became simple. If the child moves, medicate. If they cry, medicate. If they so much as look like they're considering a tantrum, break out the cordial and pray they nap until Tuesday. Now that the household is calm and the kids are staring peacefully into the wallpaper, let's stroll over to the candy shop. Because yes, some of that medication, it came in stick form, wrapped in paper, and handed out like sweets. Next up, the opium candy craze. Sugar, spice, and mild sedation. Let's go. Candy shops proudly sell sticks of quietness candy, a delightful mix of sugar, coloring, and the reason Victorian toddlers slept 14-hour stretches. You step into the local sweet shop expecting innocence. Shelves of peppermint sticks, jars of lemon drops, trays of bonbons that jingle with nostalgia. But instead, you find a surreal selection of treats that seem like they were curated by a chemist with a sugar addiction and no sense of dosage. There's barley sugar with a hint of morphine, caramels that come with a side of coma, and lozenges that double as both dessert and low-grade anesthetic. This isn't a secret. Nobody's hiding it. The shopkeeper smiles as she scoops infant tranquility sticks into a paper bag, casually mentioning that a half stick is good for tantrums, and a full stick is ideal for troublesome sleep behaviors, which is a polite way of saying screaming like a banshee in the coal scuttle at 3 a.m. Parents loved these candies. Why wouldn't they? They were cheaper than medicine, easier to administer, and tasted like strawberry daydreams instead of bitter despair. Imagine giving your fussy toddler a treat that not only stopped the tears, but also brought you a solid afternoon of peace, quiet, and possibly uninterrupted laundry. Bliss. Of course, opium candy wasn't written on the label. That would be gauche. Instead, it was sold under names like Soothing Confection, Children's Comfort Drops, or the more direct, nerve-calming sweetmeats. Each name danced politely around the fact that what you were buying was essentially pharmaceutical sugar. There were even ads in popular newspapers with smiling babies and bold claims like, "Promotes restfulness and gentle cheer." One particularly ambitious slogan claimed, "Preferred by mothers, nurses, and restless infants alike." And yes, these candies were given out liberally. Birthday parties, church picnics, after a skinned knee, before a nap, or when grandma just couldn't anymore. Some children developed quite a taste for them. Others became quietly philosophical around their third lozenge and had to be gently redirected from trying to recite psalms to the wallpaper. The social logic behind this was simple. If something makes children quiet, it is good. This was not the age of helicopter parenting. This was the age of, please be still while I boil laundry in a cauldron and try not to have a nervous breakdown. Discipline was important. Cleanliness was nearly impossible. And silence? Silence was gold. If a bit of opium could help a candy achieve that silence, well, that was just good parenting. And candy wasn't the only carrier. There were opium chocolates, pastilles, licorice drops, and syrups turned into chewy taffies. Some of these even made their way into adult sweets, marketed as digestive aids or evening refreshments. So if you've ever wondered what it felt like to eat a Victorian peppermint and suddenly forget what day it is, congratulations, you've time-traveled. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. A few fussy doctors raised concerns. Some nervous clergy members gave sermons with titles like The Confectionery Menace. But for the most part, no one listened. The market was booming, and any attempt to regulate it was shouted down by very tired mothers who just wanted their toddler to stop yelling about buttons for 5 minutes. By the late 19th century, reformers finally began to raise the alarm. Reports trickled in of children who didn't wake up, of developmental issues, of teenagers who'd grown up with candy and now graduated to something stronger. The outcry built slowly as public health caught up with public habit. By the early 1900s, laws were passed, ingredients had to be labeled, and the candy lost its edge, metaphorically and chemically. But for now, in 1872, you can still buy a handful of sleepy drops for a penny. You tuck them into your pocket, listening to the gentle hum of the shop bell, and marvel at a world where candy could cure a tantrum and maybe cause one 10 years later. So the next time you see a Victorian child quietly licking a peppermint, eyes glazed, don't worry. They're not thinking about algebra. They're thinking about nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, let's take a walk down the street. It's time to meet the man who sold these medicinal miracles, the apothecary, whose qualifications are must-own bottles and must look vaguely trustworthy. You walk into the local apothecary, a dim room where bottles containing everything from peppermint oil to literal poison are stored on identical shelves. No regulations, no labeling standards, no problem. Everything smells like licorice, liniment, and mild danger. There's a bell on the door that jangles weakly as you enter. And behind the counter stands a man who looks like he once lost an argument with a bottle of arsenic and never fully recovered. His waistcoat is stained, his spectacles are fogged, and he's measuring something out with a spoon he swears is accurate because he uses it for everything. There is no formal training required to become an apothecary in 1872. If you can frown thoughtfully and say the phrase, a congested humours situation, you're halfway there. This man, let's call him Mr. Tibbins, takes one look at your pale, rattled child and immediately recommends a syrup. What's in it? You'll never know. What does it do? Balances the constitution. Does it contain opium, alcohol, and something possibly harvested during a full moon? Probably. The shelves are lined with bottles that look exactly the same. One might contain honey and lemon. The one next to it might contain turpentine and hope. The labels, when they exist at all, are hand-scrawled in a font only decipherable after a long apprenticeship in frustration. You squint at one that says, Elixir No, 9 and underneath, in faded ink. Soothes nerves, brightens eyes, and may cause mild hallucinations. Excellent. Mr. Tibbins asks your child's symptoms. You list them. Irritability, teething, refusal to nap, and a tendency to chew on everything in sight like a small, determined beaver. He nods solemnly, strokes his chin, and mutters something about excess bile. He begins assembling your treatment like he's auditioning for a potions class. 2 drops of this, 3 shakes of that, a sprinkle of powder from a jar, labeled children's dust. You don't ask questions. This is how medicine works here. You are handed a corked bottle with a thick, molasses-colored liquid that smells like licorice and abandonment. The instructions are simple. 1 teaspoon is needed, but not too often, and certainly not on Tuesdays if the moon is waning. The dosage is vague, but the confidence is overwhelming. You pay your pennies, tuck the bottle into your coat, and leave with the uneasy feeling that you may have just purchased either a miracle or an exorcism. Victorian apothecaries were many things. Part healer, part chemist, part community therapist. They were your first stop for coughs, colic, mystery rashes, and spiritual unease. People came in with problems and left with jars, powders, and vague reassurances that everything would be fine if you just rested and kept your bowels open. No one knew what that meant, but everyone nodded like it was sage advice. Side effects were not discussed. If your child became unusually quiet, developed a 1,000-yard stare, or fell asleep mid-step, that was the medicine doing its work. If your uncle's foot turned blue after taking the arthritis tonic, well, perhaps he was too attached to it anyway. Medicine in 1872 wasn't about curing, it was about trying. It was effort wrapped in glass, sealed with wax, and served with a spoon. Sometimes the cures did work. Peppermint oil helped stomachaches. Willow bark reduced fevers. But those were the calm ones. The exciting ones had names like Godfrey's Mixture and the Mother's Little Helper. And they came with results you could measure in minutes, and regrets you could measure in hours. As you step back into the street, medicine in hand, you feel empowered, uncertain, marginally cursed. Either way, your child has stopped fussing, possibly because of the syrup, possibly because they're now fascinated by the horse across the street eating someone's laundry. You survived the apothecary. Good job. Let's head home before this stuff starts working on you. Next up, bedtime in the Victorian house. A cozy little hellscape of cold sheets, flickering lamps, and lullabies with deeply questionable lyrics. Let's tuck in. Teething rings? Nope. Teething crackers? Doesn't exist. Victorian infants get numbed with opium and whiskey because it builds character according to absolutely no legitimate source. Teething in 1872 is less a developmental milestone and more an escalating domestic crisis. The moment a baby's gums start swelling, everyone in the house goes on high alert. The mother tenses. The father winces. The older siblings scatter like pigeons sensing danger. Even the family cat, who has survived 3 chimney fires and 1 collapsing roof, looks nervous. A teething baby is not just loud, it is unyielding. It is a force of nature. It is the Victorian equivalent of a hurricane warning. Naturally, the Victorians respond with their favourite solution, chemicals. When the wailing begins, someone reaches for a bottle of laudanum with the kind of reflexive speed modern parents reserve for diaper wipes. They dab a little on the baby's gums, and for a moment, all is calm. The child looks up with an expression that can only be described as philosophical detachment, as though pondering the meaning of life, mortality, and why spoons exist. Then the eyelids droop, the limbs go soft, and yes, your teething baby is now asleep, sedated and dreaming about clouds. If laudanum isn't available, there's always whiskey. Just a dab on the gums, the Victorians say, and the child relaxes. It numbs the pain, soothes the nerves, and gives the baby something to think about besides chewing through the nearest piece of furniture. This is absolutely not endorsed by modern medical professionals. But Victorian ones? Oh, they loved it. There were pamphlets. There were recipes. One even recommended warming the whiskey first for better absorption, which is a phrase that should never be associated with infants. Other home remedies are equally alarming. Some parents mix opium with honey, creating a paste that tastes sweet, coats the gums, and ensures the baby will not complain for a frankly concerning amount of time. Others massage the gums with soothing powders, which sounds lovely until you realize the powders often contained mercury. Yes, mercury. The stuff that makes hat makers go insane. And the Victorians are just calmly rubbing it on the gums of people who still don't have object permanence. There's also the ever-popular gum lancing, which is exactly as horrifying as it sounds. A parent or doctor takes a small knife, cleaned if you're lucky, and slices open the gum so the tooth can come through easier. The baby screams, the adults perspire, and afterwards everyone insists the child will thank them one day, which is a bold assumption for someone who can't yet hold their own head up. Of course, Victorians genuinely think they're helping. They're exhausted, overwhelmed, sleep-deprived, and dealing with approximately 11 other crises before breakfast. A teething infant threatens the fragile ecosystem of the household. Laundry piles up, chores halt. The baby's shrieks rattle through the paper-thin walls and possibly alert the neighbors 3 houses down. Parents choose between hours of non-stop crying or a teaspoon of something that will quiet the baby in minutes. And when you frame it like that, their logic becomes both horrifying and understandable. And babies were soothed. They slept. They stopped gnawing on chair legs like tiny, furious beavers. They gave the household a break. For a moment, blessed, golden silence, a quiet so rare it might as well be collected in jars and treasured. But every remedy has consequences. Some of these doses were too strong. Some babies didn't wake up right away. Some woke up groggy, confused, and with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who's just had a mystical encounter with their own toes. And yet, the cycle repeated. Every tooth meant a new battle. Every battle meant a new dose. Welcome to Victorian teething, where knives, narcotics, and whiskey are all considered viable medical solutions. Now that the baby is blissfully unconscious, possibly dreaming of floating through a warm cloud of milk, it's time to head outside. The day is beginning, and so is the assault on your lungs. Let's step into Victorian London's morning fog, also known as the air trying to kill you. As you step outside, the soundscape is a combination of clanging machinery, yelling vendors, and a horse loudly regretting its life choices. Everything smells like damp iron and economic desperation. Welcome to the streets of industrial London, a place where ambition, coal dust, and poor municipal planning collide. It's the 1870s, and the Industrial Revolution is at full throttle, which means the city runs on steam, soot, and children's labor. You can practically taste the progress. It tastes like metal and moral ambiguity. The road is made of uneven cobblestones and vague intentions. Carriages rattle by, kicking up the kind of street mud that's 10% water and 90% historical mystery. You sidestep something that might be horse-related or person-related. It's hard to tell. Everything blends into the same greyish-brown palette of soot, mud, and lingering sadness. The air is thick with fog, but not the romantic kind. This is London particular, a famously poisonous mix of smoke and fog that blankets the city like a damp wool sweater, soaked in car exhaust. You breathe in deeply and immediately regret every life decision that's led you to this exact moment. Your lungs file a complaint, your eyes water, a pigeon coughs. Factories line the streets like exhausted giants, their brick chimneys spewing out endless smoke, each one adding a fresh layer of existential dread to the atmosphere. Inside, men, women, and very small, very sooty children are working 14-hour shifts to make buttons, boots, or bricks, sometimes all at once. Labour laws are a newfangled concept, still being debated somewhere in Parliament over a brandy and a cigar. You pass a match factory where the workers are mostly teenage girls with phosphorus-stained fingers and brittle smiles. The same factory will be part of a labour strike in a few years. But right now, they're busy trying not to breathe too hard near the open flame. Around the corner is a tannery that smells like wet nightmares and beef jerky. Don't ask. Keep walking. Street vendors shout aggressively at passers-by, offering everything from questionable meat pies to miracle elixirs that claim to cure gout, sadness, and possibly romantic rejection. A man with no shoes is selling newspapers with headlines like "Mystery Fog Kills 3" and "Local Dog Elected Mayor of Stress Street." You're not sure if it's satire or just accurate. Children dart through the alleys, most of them working, none of them clean. One's selling matches, another's holding a sign for a pawn shop. A third is eating something suspicious out of a newspaper and looks at you like you're the weird one. Their faces are smudged, their coats are threadbare, and their eyes say, "I've already seen too much." And they have. Childhood in industrial London is a brief window between birth and employment. And then there's the noise. Bells ring, gears grind. Someone's hammering metal to the rhythm of a Victorian anxiety attack. The city never really quiets down, it just changes its frequency of despair. Your boots are already soaked. Your coat smells like chimney smoke. And you realize with sudden clarity that this is not just a city. It's an ongoing experiment in how much noise and suffering one place can contain without spontaneously combusting. But here's the thing. People live here. They thrive here. In their own soot-covered, whistle-screaming, horse-dodging way. They build lives in this industrial mosh pit. They fall in love, write terrible poetry, raise children, and go to work each morning with the quiet, unflinching resilience of people who have no other choice. You cough politely into your scarf, which immediately turns a darker shade of grey, and press forward. Up ahead, it's time to see where those exhausted factory workers sleep, in crowded buildings where privacy is imaginary and the wallpaper may be edible in an emergency. Next up, the boarding house. Welcome to Victorian communal living. Hope you weren't expecting curtains. The streets are full of children selling matches, newspapers, or their sense of hope. Many of them haven't slept in 2 days, except maybe when the opium candy hits. Welcome to the bustling, soot-streaked underbelly of 1872 London, where children are the city's most underpaid, overworked, and wildly unsupervised labor force. If you're under 4 feet tall and moderately coherent, congratulations. You qualify for at least 3 jobs and no days off. You spot them immediately, a blur of tattered jackets, bare feet, and the uncanny ability to vanish into alleyways at the first sign of responsibility. These aren't the plucky child actors from musical theatre. These are the real street kids. Their faces are smudged with coal dust, their eyes are both too tired and too old, and their hands are perpetually sticky from either jam or trauma. It's unclear. Most are technically orphans. Others are functionally so, sent out at dawn by overwhelmed parents with a firm pat on the back and instructions to return with money or not at all. And they do. They return with coins earned from selling matches, shining shoes, singing poorly on corners, or watching rich people's horses for 3 seconds and demanding a fee. It's not work in the traditional sense, it's economic improv. One kid, no more than 6, is yelling "News, news," while waving a paper he can't read. Another crouches on a street corner, trying to sell flowers that look like they were trampled in 1847. Further down, a group of mudlarks are wading into the Thames, enthusiastically searching for valuable debris, and definitely trying to ignore the floating rat carcass drifting ominously nearby. If you're thinking, surely someone is looking after them, then you are adorable. Victorian society's idea of child welfare is mostly don't die too publicly. There are orphanages, yes, some run by churches, others by people who read half a Bible and opened a building. But those places are overcrowded, underfunded, and frequently just as grim as the streets. Many kids prefer the freedom of London's alleys to the discipline of a home that smells like boiled despair and punishments. Of course, no one wants to punish these kids, but the system does it anyway. Laws are vague. Policing is inconsistent. If you're a child and you steal food, you might end up in a workhouse. If you loiter too long near the wrong shop, someone might accuse you of theft, and suddenly you're on your way to court where a judge named Sir Hufflebutton sentences you to 6 months of hard labor for being suspiciously hungry. And yet, somehow, they survive. They're clever, these kids. They band together in ragtag clumps, forming impromptu friend gangs bonded by shared trauma and a single warm potato. They know which market stalls give out crusts, which chimney sweeps are hiring, and which apothecaries will look the other way when you're 3 pennies short for the cough drops. Spoiler. The drops are 40% laudanum, 30% sugar, and 30% wishful thinking. They find warmth where they can, steam grates, under carts, between the cracks in social decency. They sleep in stairwells, in old barrels, on roofs, or occasionally upright while walking. Some children master the rare art of the standing nap, where they snooze while pretending to shine your shoes. It's impressive. It's heartbreaking. It's also peak Victorian London. Occasionally, a kind soul gives them a blanket or a meat pie. And for a brief moment, humanity flickers in the gloom. But for the most part, they're on their own, tiny entrepreneurs in a city that considers their suffering quaint background texture. They are the uncredited extras of every industrial progress story. The silent workforce fueling the economy one match at a time. And they never complain. Mostly because no one is listening. Now that we've met London's smallest survivors, let's go see where their adult counterparts collapse after a day of near-identical misery. Next stop, the boarding house. Bring your own mattress. Or don't, it won't matter. You approach the looming stone structure known as the workhouse. Essentially a misery factory where people go to lose their will to live in exchange for a bowl of watery gruel. The building itself looks like it. Was designed by someone who hated joy on a personal level. Tall grey walls rise against the sky like a warning. Windows are narrow, grimy, and absolutely uninterested in letting in natural light. Even the front gate creaks open with the energy of a skeleton sighing. This is not a welcoming place. This is where hope comes to do paperwork on its final day. The workhouse is the Victorian government's answer to poverty, illness, orphanhood, unemployment, misfortune, and the general audacity of being alive without a savings account. The philosophy is simple. If you're poor, we will help you by making you regret asking for help. Once inside, people are fed, clothed, and sheltered. But in the same overly literal way, a prison also technically provides these amenities. You're greeted by a man who looks like he's been carved out of damp cardboard. He escorts you down a corridor lit dimly by gas lamps, each flickering as if trying to burn out early to escape. The air carries the scent of boiled linen, institutional sadness, and the faint but ever-present aroma of cabbage. The holy trinity of Victorian despair. Your footsteps echo, which is unfortunate, because there's something about a long echo in a place like this that makes you instinctively straighten your posture and apologize for breathing loudly. The first room you see is the labor hall. Rows of adults sit at long tables, heads down, working silently. Some pick oakum, old ropes pulled apart by hand to be repurposed for ships. It's tedious, mind-numbing, and designed specifically to crush any remaining sense of individuality. If Spotify playlists existed, this task would still feel unbearable. Others sort rags, grind bones, peel potatoes, or complete tasks so repetitive that even machines would unionize in protest. Children as young as 5 help out too, because Victorian society has the same energy as a corporate memo titled, we can cut labor costs further. Some sweep floors, others clean the laundry. Many simply exist, looking small and overwhelmed, in a building that feels too big and too cold for their tiny bodies. Every now and then, one yawns, and a supervisor snaps at them, because historically, nothing says compassion like scolding a toddler for fatigue. You step next into the dining area, where meals are served on metal trays that seem allergic to warmth. The famous gruel sits in vats, a thin mixture of oats and sadness. It tastes like damp wallpaper paste, and somehow manages to have both too much water and not enough flavor. Bread rations are small, hard, and apparently sourced from the same bakery that supplied medieval catapults. Conversation is rare. Eating is done quickly, quietly, and without joy. You immediately feel an urge to hug your modern refrigerator. Sleeping arrangements aren't much better. Large dormitories cram beds side by side, each one a variation of lumpy discomfort. Mattresses are stuffed with straw that has seen more winters than you have birthdays. Privacy is a myth. Noise is constant. Snoring, coughing, and the occasional night terrors form an involuntary workhouse lullaby, though lullaby is a generous term for something that sounds like tuberculosis rhythmically harmonizing with despair. But the true cruelty of the workhouse isn't in the physical discomfort, though there's plenty of that. It's the psychological weight. Families are separated upon entry. Husbands placed in one wing, wives in another, children in another still. The idea is that hardship builds moral character. What it mostly builds is tears. Outside these walls, people speak of the workhouse in hushed tones. Nobody wants to end up here. Even the poorest laborers will work to exhaustion before knocking on that heavy front door. Yet inside, people endure. They adapt. They survive. Not out of inspiration, but out of necessity, the oldest human instinct. And as you step back into the street, leaving the giant stone block behind, you feel the cold air hit your face differently. There's relief, yes, but also a lingering heaviness, a quiet recognition that for many Victorians, this wasn't a cautionary tale. This was Tuesday. Now wipe off that existential dread. There's still more 1872 suffering to explore. Next up, the Victorian doctor, a man with infinite confidence, 3 medical theories, and exactly 1 prescription. More laudanum. Victorian physicians operate under the sacred medical philosophy of, give them laudanum. They prescribe opium for coughs, colic, headaches, and emotional turbulence. You walk into the doctor's office, if you can call it that. It's more like a cluttered parlor with a faint smell of vinegar and suppressed screams. There's a desk, a bookshelf stacked with ominous-looking volumes titled things like Miasma, Nature's Little Curse, and a chair that wobbles slightly more than you're emotionally comfortable with. The doctor enters, adjusting his waistcoat, and you can immediately tell from his moustache that he considers himself an authority on everything. He greets you with confidence, which is impressive considering he has 0 diagnostic tools, and his stethoscope looks like something he whittled out of an umbrella handle. But don't worry, he's read at least half a book on humours and once attended a weekend lecture in Edinburgh. You're in passable hands. You explain the symptoms, a cough, a bit of stomach discomfort, some listlessness, and an overall feeling that your baby shouldn't be vibrating at rest. He nods gravely. "Ah, yes," he says, "a classic case of overexcitement in the spleen." You are not sure what your spleen does, but he seems deeply concerned about it. Before you can ask, he's already reaching for the laudanum. Laudanum, the doctor's best friend, a lovely little potion of opium and alcohol, doled out for everything from menstrual cramps to existential dread. It comes in charming glass bottles with elegant script on the label and zero dosage information. Doctors prescribe it like it's herbal tea. Got a toothache? Laudanum. Trouble sleeping? Laudanum. Unsure whether your rash is spiritual or medical? Double laudanum. The best part is that no two doctors agree on how much you should take. One recommends a drop on the tongue, while another shrugs and says, however much quiets the fits. Sometimes a drop means the size of a tear. Other times, it's a spoonful that makes you feel like you've personally offended time and space. Need surgery? Too bad. Anesthetic isn't reliably used yet. But if you're lucky, the doctor might give you a stiff drink and suggest you bite down on something leather. If you're very lucky, he's one of the few progressive types who's experimenting with chloroform, ether, or other delightful chemicals that double as explosive hazards. Diagnostics are less science and more poetry. Your child is pale? That's blood deficiency. They're hyper? Clearly an excess of nervous fluid. You're sad for more than a day? You have melancholia, which may be treated with arsenic, a brisk walk, or being yelled at by a clergyman. A woman showing too much emotion might be diagnosed with hysteria, which is doctor speak, for I don't like this tone. The doctor's toolkit includes all the classics. Cupping, placing hot glass bulbs on your back to draw out badness. Blistering, yes, literally causing blisters on purpose. And, of course, leeches, the go-to treatment for everything from fevers to financial anxiety. There's also the reliable standby of bloodletting, which is when you have a headache. So the doctor just decides to drain you like a medieval keg. If none of that works, there's always tonics. Tonics are like potions, but with even more mystery. You don't ask what's in them. You just swallow and hope. Popular favorites include Dr. Allen's Vegetable Elixir and Professor Bixby's Sanity Serum, both of which promise to stabilize your mood, improve digestion, and possibly summon the ghost of Queen Elizabeth I for emotional support. And yet people trust these doctors because they have top hats, monocles, and a vocabulary rich in Latin, because the world is terrifying. And someone saying you'll be fine with enough authority can feel like medicine in itself. So you take the laudanum. You nod politely. You promise to rest and keep your bowels balanced. And you leave, woozy but comforted, knowing that if you don't feel better tomorrow, there's always more laudanum. Next up, the nighttime rituals of a Victorian household. Bring your candle stub, your questionable pajamas, and your deepest fears. Sleep hygiene hasn't been invented yet, but don't worry. The arsenic wallpaper will keep you company. This reddish-brown tincture of alcohol and opium is prescribed for everything. Toothache? Laudanum. Melancholy? Laudanum. Arguing with your spouse? Guess what? Laudanum is Victorian society's favorite coping mechanism, miracle cure, and daily hobby all in one convenient bottle. It's the drink of choice for parents, poets, politicians, and anyone who accidentally read the morning newspaper. Side effects include drowsiness, vivid hallucinations, and an overwhelming sense that maybe your spleen is plotting against you. The recipe is deceptively simple. Tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol. That's it. No preservatives, no disclaimers, and certainly no dosage guidelines. It's sold over the counter at every apothecary, general store, and possibly in the alley behind the butchers. Prices are low. Social stigma is non-existent. And the public appetite? Absolutely insatiable. You probably already have a bottle in your cabinet. Maybe two. One is labeled for neuralgia, the other for lady complaints. But they're both laudanum, and they both do exactly the same thing. Make you feel like your body's floating 2 feet behind your own thoughts. You don't solve your problems with laudanum. You simply forget you had them. Take it for headaches, period cramps, digestion, nervousness, or just a general vibe that something's off. There's even a kid-safe version, and by kid-safe, we mean the same formula, but with a cartoon sheep on the label. Victorian parents hand it out like modern fruit snacks. Little Timmy won't sleep? A few drops. Sarah got upset at her alphabet slate. Half a spoonful and she'll be reciting Shakespeare backwards. Doctors love it. They prescribe it with the same enthusiasm as a bartender on New Year's Eve. If your symptoms persist, they'll just suggest a slightly heartier pour. The line between dose and doom is not a line at all, it's a smudge. And it moves depending on whether your doctor had lunch that day. And it's not just the working classes who love the stuff. The upper crust is absolutely marinated in laudanum. Aristocratic women use it to soften their edges. Artists use it to tap into the melancholy required for writing 600-page novels about doomed cousins. Everyone from Lord Byron to Charles Dickens had a little bottle tucked in their pocket, claiming it made them more reflective. Spoiler, it made them more horizontal. The effects are effective. Within minutes, you feel relaxed, warm, slightly blurry. Your pain fades. So does your motivation, your sense of time, and, if you've taken a bit too much, your ability to walk in a straight line. But no one questions it. You're not addicted. You're just refined. You're delicate. You're sensitive to the humors. But here's the catch. Laudanum doesn't care if you're a duchess or a dock worker. It doesn't ask whether you're sipping it for grief or just because Thursdays are hard. The body gets used to it. Then it needs more. And more. And suddenly, your quiet evening pick-me-up turns into a daily ritual that you don't feel quite right without. You're not sure if you have a headache or just forgot your 3 o'clock dose. And then the side effects creep in: insomnia, nausea, mood swings, the sudden urge to monologue about the moon. Your friends stage subtle interventions. They stop lending you spoons. Apothecaries start raising their eyebrows when you ask for another bottle. But it's the Victorian era. There is no rehab. There is no AA meeting. There is only the polite fiction that everything is under control and a refill behind the counter. Eventually, someone notices. A few doctors raise concerns. A few clergymen grumble from the pulpit. But for now, for you, here in 1872, the bottle is full, the house is quiet, and your joints don't hurt anymore. Go on, take a sip. We'll deal with the consequences later. Next up, it's time for bed, and by bed, we mean a sagging mattress stuffed with regrets, surrounded by arsenic green wallpaper and dreams of soot. Sleep tight. Try not to inhale too deeply. The nursery cabinet is filled with soothing syrups, teething powders, calming drops, and tinctures so potent you're surprised the cabinet doesn't shake at night. It's more apothecary than toy chest. Less Fisher-Price. More Dr. Frankenstein's starter kit. You open the creaking wooden doors expecting to find perhaps a rattle, a blanket, maybe a half-used bottle of gripe water. Instead, you find the Victorian version of a pharmaceutical rave. Front and center. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. A household name. Not a single mother in London doesn't have a bottle tucked into a cabinet, under a pillow, or just casually strapped to her belt like a utility weapon. What's in it? Oh, just a soothing blend of morphine, alcohol, and a dash of molasses so you forget it's slowly taking your child on a mild spiritual journey. It claims to relieve teething, pain, and fussiness, which is accurate if you include functionally sedate your baby until next Tuesday under relief. Next to that, Infant quiet powder, a chalky little packet designed to be mixed into milk or water, or just dabbed directly onto a crying mouth, depending on how loud the tantrum is. The ingredients are a fun little mystery, but likely include opium derivatives, starch, and hope. It's labeled harmless by 1872 standards, which means it won't immediately cause hallucinations if you dilute it enough. That's a big if. Beside it sits a vial of calming drops, meant to soothe the nerves of fretful children. Spoiler, these aren't herbs. These are small-batch Victorian anxiety suppressors brewed in someone's basement. The smell alone could knock out a pony. You're pretty sure one drop accidentally touched your finger, and now you're questioning the nature of linear time. Then there's Godfrey's cordial, which is less cordial and more chemical warfare in a bottle. Originally advertised as ideal for colic, it was used for everything from teething to general fussiness to, presumably, inconvenient personality traits. Entire families swore by it. Entire doctors warned against it. The government eventually banned it, which is the Victorian version of admitting, yes, this probably wasn't a good idea. Not to be outdone, there's also a tall glass bottle of Sleep Easy syrup. Because if you name something cozy enough, people stop asking what's in it. This one is a blend of chloral hydrate, alcohol, and sugar water, bottled under the confident claim, "No more midnight misery," which would be catchy if it weren't, in fact, the first line of a horror novel. At the back of the cabinet is a dusty jar labeled Soothing Rub, which can be applied to gums, foreheads, feet, or any surface of a child currently experiencing emotions. It smells vaguely minty, which is cute, until you realize it's packed with belladonna and ether. It doesn't so much soothe as stun. And let's not forget opium lozenges for little ones, mint-flavored, small, cute, lethal in doses exceeding a few. Sold at sweet shops and sometimes even given as party favors at children's gatherings. Imagine giving these out at a birthday party today. You'd be on 5 watch lists and have 3 podcasts made about you before dessert. This nursery cabinet is not child-safe. It is child-silencing, and it reflects the prevailing Victorian philosophy. Children should be seen, not heard, and ideally horizontal. The tools to achieve this were available, affordable, and very much unregulated. And it worked, at a cost. Babies were quiet, naps were long, but dependence crept in, dosages crept up, side effects crept harder, and soon, quiet wasn't always a good sign. Still, to the exhausted Victorian mother, with laundry boiling, soup burning, and 3 more children on the floor arguing over a dead mouse, that cabinet must have looked like salvation. Close the doors now. Gently. The bottles rattle ominously. If you're too rough. Let's move on to the bedtime routine. A process involving itchy nightshirts, cold fireplaces, and lullabies written by someone who definitely had unresolved trauma. Laundry involves boiling huge pots of water, scrubbing like your life depends on it, and praying nothing catches fire, because many things catch fire. It is 6 a.m., and you've already regretted waking up. The fire hasn't taken, your hands are still numb from the damp chill in the air, and your washing pile is large enough to qualify as a geological feature. You stare at it like it insulted your family, because it did. It's been multiplying overnight like rabbits in linen form. Laundry day in 1872 isn't a chore, it's a lifestyle. A full day, full-body experience of hauling, boiling, lifting, scrubbing, wringing, and wondering why you ever thought having this many children was a good idea. There's no machine humming gently in the background. Just you, a washtub the size of a wine barrel, and a deep sense of existential exhaustion. First, you heat the water, using the same stove you use to cook, heat the room, and occasionally dry your socks over. Very flammable behavior, but this is Victorian life. You dump in chunks of lye soap made from animal fat and raw defiance. The result is a cloudy, slippery broth that smells like regret. If you're lucky, you haven't splashed it directly into your eye this week. Then comes the scrubbing. You dunk your clothing into the cauldron of doom and start attacking it with a washboard like you're trying to extract secrets from it. Knuckles redden. Backs ache. The fabric is coarse. The soap is aggressive. You are 10 minutes in and already rethinking your life choices. And remember, the water doesn't stay warm, so you work fast. Or you're left trying to wring out socks in water colder than your mother-in-law's compliments. If your house has a mangle, a hand-cranked, fabric-crushing nightmare, then lucky you. You now get to squeeze out water by feeding your clothes between two rollers, while praying you don't accidentally mangle your actual fingers. Many have. The mangle has no mercy. Drying naturally is no better. There are no dryers, no sunny backyards, no Pinterest-worthy laundry lines fluttering in the breeze. You hang clothing indoors, near the fire, where it slowly steams itself into a damp fog of mildew and coal smoke. Or worse, you hang it outside, where it becomes a flag waving bravely in the toxic London fog. The only thing stiffer than the laundry is your spine after 6 hours of hauling it upstairs and down again. And that's just laundry. You still have dishes to clean with water you had to heat yourself, floors to scrub on your hands and knees with a stiff brush and no sympathy, and furniture to polish using beeswax and your last remaining optimism. If the baby cries during all this, congratulations. You now have to soothe a child while wrangling a 200-pound copper pot of water with one hand. Cleaning the chamber pot? That's your job too. It's sitting there, under the bed, judging you. You carry it out, down the stairs, through the narrow hallway, and into the backyard where it joins a long line of other people's Tuesday mornings. There is no dignity in this job, only necessity. Victorian household chores are unforgiving. There's no, "I'll do it later." If you wait, the stains set in, the fire dies down, and the lie hardens into a chalky slab of contempt. There's no such thing as a clean house, only less filthy. And no matter how hard you work, there's always someone asking when dinner will be ready. By the time you collapse into your chair, if you even own one, you're too tired to move. Your hands are raw, your clothes are damp, your soul is, at best, mildly bruised, and someone's already spilled jam on a clean smock. No wonder Victorians gave their kids opium to sleep. They needed a break too. Now that we've sufficiently broken your spirit with manual labor, let's transition to something gentler. Bedtime. Not for you, for the children, which, in Victorian times, is just as chaotic, but with more bonnets. Midday London is its own chaotic symphony. Carriages rattle, vendors shout, someone is definitely being scolded, and chimneys belch out soot like dying dragons. You step out into the mid-Victorian street and are immediately greeted by an overwhelming cacophony that can only be described as aggressively alive. The city isn't just bustling. It's vibrating with the energy of 1,000 people trying to make money, avoid tuberculosis, and not get run over by a cart full of cabbages. It's lunchtime in 1872, which means absolutely no one is resting. First, the noise. There are no traffic signals, no noise ordinances, and certainly no sense of personal space. Every street is a negotiation. Horses clip-clop impatiently, their drivers yelling things like "Hya" or "Move your bloody cargo, Charlie," at approximately 120 decibels. Newspaper boys scream headlines in tones that imply they're also working through some personal issues. A woman is yelling at a fishmonger over the price of a suspiciously glazed cod. The fishmonger is yelling back with the energy of a man who hasn't slept since 1856. In the background, street musicians are battling it out like it's Victorian Britain's Got Talent. One's playing a concertina, another's whistling with shocking commitment. A third is just banging a tin can and nodding meaningfully, as if he's inventing punk. Every corner is its own auditory genre. Add to that the chimneys. Each one sighs out a puff of coal smoke that joins the others in forming London's signature airborne soup. The air is thick, the sun is theoretical, and your lungs are already filing an informal complaint. It's like breathing through a wool sock soaked in fireplace juice. The smells? Unforgettable. Not in a good way. There's fresh bread wafting from a bakery, which sounds pleasant until it's immediately undercut by the stench of horse manure, boiling tripe, rotting vegetables, and the mysterious essence of whatever died under that cart last week. One whiff is bakery heaven. The next is pure regret. The streets themselves are a barely contained obstacle course. Cobblestones are uneven. Gutters overflow, and something squishy just attached itself to your boot. You hope it's cabbage. You pray it's cabbage. You know it's not cabbage. Vendors are everywhere, and they are not subtle. They wave products in your face, eels, matches, questionable pies, while yelling prices like it's an auction and everyone's already late. Some are pushy, some are charming. All are aggressively committed to the sale. One man tries to sell you a handkerchief that may or may not be someone's curtain. Another promises a miracle tonic that will clear the lungs and cleanse the conscience. Tempting. Children dart through the chaos, weaving between carts, shouting to each other in a blend of slang and sheer survival instinct. One slides under a carriage wheel and emerges victorious, holding half a potato and a tooth that may or may not be his. It's impressive. It's horrifying. It's Tuesday. Somewhere nearby, a minor fire is being handled with buckets, and the kind of optimism only Victorians could muster. The crowd has gathered, not to help, of course, but to watch. Fire is entertainment, especially if it doesn't involve your roof. Amid all this, you spot a nobleman striding down the street, utterly unfazed by the madness. He's followed by a servant carrying his walking stick and an umbrella, despite the clear sky. A woman in silk and lace side-eyes, a chimney sweep with the kind of judgment that could curdle milk. They do not inhabit the same city. They just happen to be standing in it at the same time. This is midday in London. Loud, smoky, frantic, and deeply alive. It's a place where every street has 6 stories happening at once, none of them quiet, and at least one involving a goose on the loose. You blink, cough, and take one cautious step forward. Next stop, lunch, which sounds comforting until you remember this is Victorian cuisine. Bon appetit. From cocaine toothache drops to arsenic complexion wafers, Victorians really said if it glows or numbs something, it's probably fine. You open the little tin, labelled Dr. Blenkinsop's patented nerve calmer, and immediately notice 2 things. It smells like boot polish, and it promises to cure everything from insomnia to marital dissatisfaction. This is Victorian medicine, baby, where the ingredients list is a game of roulette. The side effects are your problem, and the only thing stricter than the dose is the mustache on the man who sold it to you. Let's start with the toothache. Your molar is throbbing. You can't eat. You can't sleep. You're about 5 minutes from trying to yank it out with fireplace tongs. But wait! There's a miracle product at your local apothecary. Cocaine toothache drops. No, not metaphorical cocaine. Actual, pharmacy-grade, nervous system vaporizing cocaine. Sold to parents. For children. In a glass bottle with a cheery label and an applicator brush. The instructions are basically dab directly onto the gums and ride the lightning. Feel a bit tired and pale? Time to perk up with arsenic complexion wafers. These delightful little tablets are marketed to women who want that radiant porcelain glow. Because nothing screams beauty like low-dose poisoning, these wafers were often used over months, leading to luminous skin, brittle teeth, and sometimes glowing in the dark. But hey, you looked fantastic for at least half the funeral. Got asthma? Don't worry. There's a smokable remedy for that. It's called asthma cigarettes, and yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. Containing everything from stramonium leaves to belladonna and straight-up tobacco, these were designed to be inhaled deeply into lungs that were already wheezing. The logic? Smoke out the inflammation. The result? Lung failure, but with a lovely herbal aftertaste. There's also Radithor, a drinkable tonic laced with, wait for it, radioactive isotopes. Okay, this one's slightly later than the classic Victorian period, but it fits the theme so well that it's basically the spiritual successor of everything Victorians were brewing. One dose promised to energize your blood and restore male vigor. Translation: you might develop superpowers, or your jaw might fall off. Bit of a toss-up. But let's get back to your child. Is little Billy coughing too much? May we interest you in heroin cough syrup? Not only will he stop coughing, but he'll also stop doing pretty much anything. Widely available, perfectly legal, and terrifyingly effective, this syrup was sold under trusted names like Bayer, the same company that would later pivot into aspirin and pretend none of this happened. Need an appetite boost? Try syrup of phosphates. Because the answer to I'm tired and sad was apparently to ingest ground-up rocks. If that's too gritty, there's always Dr. Jacob's snake oil elixir, which contains approximately 5% medicine and 5% unverified hope. Its label features a snake, a man with a large hat, and a promise that you'll feel something guaranteed, legally accurate. Everything came with bold, elegant labels: nervous system vitalizer, female tonic of strength, electric ointment. Most of them sound like fantasy potions. All of them contain ingredients that would get you banned from 37 countries today. The Victorian attitude was basically, if it doesn't sting, glow, or mildly sedate you, is it even working? There were no clinical trials, no FDA, no warning labels. If you dropped dead, the remedy was simply pulled from the shelf, renamed, and re-released with a picture of a unicorn. It was medicine by vibes, by folklore, by sheer, unrelenting confidence. And yet somehow, people lived, some even thrived. Human resilience is bizarre. Or maybe it's just that Victorians were stubborn enough to power through their ailments and the remedies designed to fix them. Now close the medicine cabinet gently. Something in there just hissed. Up next, bedtime rituals. Bring your candle, your bonnet, and your faith in gravity. Because Victorian beds are where comfort goes to die. Green wallpaper is fashionable, but also gives off arsenic fumes when damp. Perfect for adding a soft Victorian glow to your slow, accidental poisoning. You run your fingers along the embossed floral pattern of the parlor wallpaper. It's elegant, refined, a rich shade of emerald that screams, "We're doing well, thank you very much." It also literally screams internally, because it's slowly off-gassing one of the deadliest substances known to humankind: arsenic. Welcome to interior design in Victorian Britain, where your walls are both a statement and a subtle threat. In the mid-19th century, green was the color, not sage, not mint. We're talking deep, theatrical, look at my wealth green. But green pigments were hard to make, until someone discovered that a mixture of copper and arsenic produced a brilliant hue called Scheele's green, or its even deadlier cousin, Paris green. Chemists looked at that and said, "This is beautiful. Let's put it everywhere." And they did. Walls, curtains, clothing, fake flowers, toys. If it could hold color, it could hold arsenic. Victorian homes turned into giant pastel gas chambers with tasseled footstools. No one questioned this because people were still bleeding themselves with leeches and drinking heroin for headaches. The vibe was aesthetic first, survival later. So what happens when that beautiful wallpaper gets damp? Glad you asked. When moisture hits arsenic-laced pigments, it releases a gas called arsine, which is both colorless and capable of ruining your entire respiratory system in the most genteel way imaginable. Symptoms included headaches, vomiting, fatigue, confusion, and eventually death. But in a lovely drawing room with velvet drapes, it's easy to mistake that for just having a weak constitution. Families would start falling ill, one by one. A child gets sleepy. The governess starts fainting. Grandmother's been looking green lately. Oh, how charming and thematic. And all the while, they're sleeping, eating, and breathing in slow-motion poison, marveling at how well the walls bring out the furniture. Doctors at the time often blamed miasma, a kind of bad air that was considered responsible for everything from colds to moral decay. The idea that decor could be deadly was too absurd, too bourgeois to consider. When people did finally suspect the wallpaper, they were told by decorators, "Oh, don't worry. Only some arsenic becomes airborne." Reassuring. Even better. The government mostly shrugged. Arsenic was legal. There were no product regulations. If your child licked the baseboard and got a nosebleed, that was seen as a parenting issue, not a materials one. People just accepted it. Like fog. Or having 14 children and only naming the ones who made it to 10. And it wasn't just in homes. You might visit a fashionable hotel, admire the tasteful green walls, and slowly cough yourself into the afterlife. Department stores sold rolls of arsenic-laced paper by the yard. Gift wrap, arsenic. Theatre sets, arsenic. That weird rash from your new chaise lounge? Yes, that too. Eventually, science caught up with style. People started dropping dead often enough that someone noticed the wallpaper connection. There were investigations, publications, arguments. One chemist even famously placed a piece of wallpaper in a sealed jar and collected the gas it released, then tested it on a mouse. The mouse did not write a review. The mouse immediately expired. By the end of the century, safer pigments began to replace the deadly ones. But for a few glorious decades, fashion was fatal, and death came in the form of tasteful damask. So, if you're redecorating a Victorian nursery in your imagination, just know that charming green motif may double as a gas trap. Sleep tight. Next up, let's climb into that Victorian bed. Scratchy, cold, and full of bed bugs with tenancy rights. Hope you weren't expecting memory foam. When nighttime hits, mothers give one last dose of opium syrup to the little ones to help them drift off. Drift where? Hard to say. But off? Absolutely. It's the end of a very long day in 1872. The coal fire is dying down, casting shaky shadows across the nursery. The wallpaper is faintly glowing with arsenic chic. The floorboards creak like a ghost with joint problems. And in a small iron-framed bed with a questionably clean blanket, your Victorian child is being lovingly prepped for a chemically assisted journey to dreamland. There's no such thing as a bedtime routine in the modern sense. No warm baths with lavender bubbles. No bedtime stories involving bunnies learning lessons about kindness. No white noise machines. The white noise here is just the sound of a rat dragging something it shouldn't across the roof tiles. And yet, somehow, the child is yawning, limbs heavy, eyes drooping. Why? Because this toddler is gently floating on a low-altitude opium buzz. Enter Missus, Winslow's soothing syrup, the Victorian parents' favorite bedtime crutch. Marketed as a remedy for teething, fussiness, colic, and general inconvenient energy, this sticky, sweet-smelling concoction is mostly morphine and molasses. The label recommends a few drops, which, translated from 19th century parenting, means enough to ensure the child doesn't wake up for at least 10 hours or a minor earthquake. There's something incredibly calm and deeply unnerving about the way these kids fall asleep. One moment, they're cranky and clawing at their socks. The next, they're face down in a pillow, stuffed with straw and lint, snoring softly like an old man who's just eaten a full roast goose. And in a way, this is considered ideal, because the quieter the child, the more peace the house has, and the less chance there is of someone launching a tantrum that turns into a 3-hour opera about missing buttons. If opium syrup isn't available, don't worry. There are laudanum drops, Godfrey's cordial, gripe water that's mostly gin, or just a little brandy mixed with sugar and maternal fatigue. Dosage is flexible. The goal isn't precision, it's silence. The phrase sleep training meant how much until they stop flailing. This bedtime cocktail is delivered with the same casual affection you'd use to hand over a teddy bear. Mothers whisper hush now and pop the cork off a vial that could legally be classified as sorcery. The child drifts off. So do their concerns. So do their long-term motor functions. But no one's tracking that yet. Once asleep, the kids are left in beds that are more iron than comfort. Wrapped in stiff linen sheets and flattened like loaves of sourdough left under a book. There's no nightlight, no teddy. Maybe a wooden toy with a missing limb if you're lucky. The room is cold, barely heated, and full of other siblings, because no Victorian child ever got their own room unless someone recently died, and they will sleep. Not because it's peaceful, not because it's quiet, but because their bloodstream is currently hosting a mild narcotic luau. Of course, this wasn't done out of cruelty. It was survival. Parents were exhausted. Life was loud. The idea of a child sleeping through the night without screaming was as mythical as fairies or plumbing. You do what you have to, even if what you have to comes in a bottle with a skull on the label and costs 6 pence. But tomorrow your toddler will rise bright-eyed, refreshed, and slightly groggy, just in time to go to work in a match factory. Childhood. Now blow out the candle, tuck in the kids, and close the door. Next up, bedtime for you, an adult, trying to sleep on a lumpy mattress, haunted by the gentle paranoia that your sheets might catch fire from the fireplace. Sweet dreams. Maybe. Adults drink a soothing nightcap of gin, brandy, or hot rum punch while pondering their mortality and hoping the house doesn't burn down overnight. Welcome to the final act of the Victorian day, bedtime for grown-ups, otherwise known as a theatrical performance of pretending you're fine. It's 10:34 p.m. The fire's burning low. Your back hurts in places you didn't know you had, and you're nursing a generous cup of something strong enough to pickle an eel, because nothing says goodnight in 1872 like a tumbler of regret, and 40% alcohol by volume. There's no bubble bath, no herbal tea, no mindfulness app. Instead, your winding down routine begins with a slightly chipped glass of gin, the good stuff, if it doesn't taste like shoe polish, and ends with you staring blankly into the fire while mentally cataloguing all the ways life could end in your sleep. You sip slowly, not because you're savoring it, but because you're trying not to gag. Victorian gin was often laced with turpentine, sawdust, or whatever else the local distiller had lying around. And you drink it anyway, because it's either this or lying awake in total darkness, listening to mice argue under the floorboards. Your thoughts drift, as they often do, to the house. Mostly wood, partially stable, lit by fire and candles, and conveniently stuffed with flammable furniture, arsenic wallpaper, and a stove that hisses like it's got a secret. Every creak is a potential blaze. Every gust of wind through the chimney makes you question your life insurance situation. You don't have any. You blow out the last candle and tiptoe to bed. The room is freezing. You pass through what scientists now call the draft vortex, that one corner of every Victorian home where the laws of insulation go to die. You climb into your bed fully clothed because pajamas are a luxury, and also because removing layers in this cold would require either bravery or whiskey. Your mattress is stuffed with straw and promises. The springs groan. The bed frame wobbles like it knows something you don't. You lie flat, arms by your side, like a corpse waiting for its portrait. There are no pillows, just a single lumpy cushion that's seen more than you have. Your blanket is made of wool, probably last washed during the Crimean War. The silence settles in, but it's not really silence. It's a curated playlist of unsettling sounds. The soft scritch of vermin, the wind howling like it's angry you exist, the rhythmic clunk of pipes trying their best, and the mysterious thud from upstairs, which could be anything from your neighbor to a ghost to gravity being dramatic. And through it all, your brain won't shut up. You think about your job, which mostly involves soot, yelling, or ledger entries written with ink that smells faintly poisonous. You think about your spouse, who is already asleep and snoring in a tone that suggests mild contempt. You think about the rising cost of coal, the plague rumors, the fact that your left eye has been twitching for 3 weeks and no one knows why. Maybe it's ghosts, maybe it's arsenic, maybe it's the gin. You shift positions. The mattress resists. One of the wooden slats gives a creaky warning, like an old man protesting his 5 a.m. constitutional. You adjust again. The blanket rides up. The pillow deflates slightly. You accept your fate. And then, just as your brain begins to power down, as sleep tiptoes in through the back door of your mind, you remember. You forgot to bank the fire. You bolt upright, grab your candle, and shuffle across the room like a weary crypt keeper. Because if you don't fix it, the house might go up in flames. Again. It's the 3rd time this month, but you make it back, eventually. Climb in. Pull the blanket up to your chin, let the nightcap do its thing, and finally sleep, uneasy, underheated, and deeply deserved. Next, the outro, because you've earned it. The street lamps flicker through the swirling fog, creating the perfect ambience for dramatic monologues, mysterious footsteps, and getting mugged. You crack open the shutters and gaze out into the Victorian night. The view is instantly obscured by fog so thick you could slice it and serve it with potatoes. It's not the romantic, cinematic mist of period dramas. No. This is London particular. The infamous pea souper, a swirling blend of fog, soot, coal, smoke, and despair. It's what happens when weather and pollution get into a bar fight and decide to raise a child together. The gas lamps glow faintly through the haze, casting sickly orange halos like tired halos around angels that gave up and took up smoking. Their light is soft and flickering, not because it's cozy, but because it's literally unstable gas being pumped through a pipe and ignited in mid-air with no modern safety standards. One stiff breeze and the whole lamp might just pop like an overconfident souffle. You hear footsteps. Someone's walking. Maybe it's a man heading home from the pub. Maybe it's a chimney sweep on his 6th job of the day. Or maybe it's the neighborhood pickpocket wearing his softest shoes and his most charming smirk. In Victorian London, there's a 50% chance any given footstep is accompanied by a crime. You spot a shadow move across the alley. It could be a gentleman in a tall hat. It could be a drunk milkman. It could be a ghost. Honestly, at this visibility, It could be a large dog wearing a hat, and no one would question it. This city thrives on ambiguity, and darkness is its favorite accessory. The streets are quieter now, but not silent. The clang of a distant bell, maybe a church, maybe someone's cart tipping over, a shrill voice arguing about rent, the clatter of hooves on cobblestone from a carriage with questionable brakes. Every sound is more dramatic when filtered through fog and low visibility. You feel like you've wandered into a stage play, except the script is mostly coughing and ducking. The night smells like old rain, ash, and mystery. Every breath brings in a touch of chimney, a splash of horse, and just a whisper of open sewer. It's the kind of air that builds character, and also builds respiratory problems. You notice the watchman making his rounds, swinging a lantern and trying very hard to look authoritative despite the fact that he's armed with little more than a whistle and confidence. He peers into alleyways like a man who knows he won't chase anyone if it comes to it. His main job is to make sure people don't lie down in the street and forget to get up. Crime prevention is more of a hobby. Somewhere, a cat yowls. Or maybe it's a baby. Or maybe it's someone trying to sound like a baby to avoid being mugged. That's an actual strategy. The night belongs to the brave, the desperate, and the deeply underemployed. You wonder how anyone sleeps with all this going on outside. The truth is, most don't. Not deeply, not safely. Doors are locked with complicated bolts. Beds are pushed away from drafty windows, and chamber pots are kept close, because you're not wandering into this gaslit nightmare just to relieve yourself, not unless you want to meet the night in person. And yet, despite the mild danger, there's something oddly peaceful about it. The stillness between the chaos, the way the lamplight softens the grime, the way the fog makes everything, even the brickwork, seem just a little more mysterious. You close the shutters, you latch the window, you draw the curtains shut, and turn away from the flickering light outside. Tomorrow, the soot will still be there. The footsteps, the faint possibility of being dramatically inconvenienced. But for now, for tonight, let the darkness roll in and let the gas lamps burn quietly. Sleep comes for the city too. Eventually. Just with a little more coughing. Victorian lungs filter more soot per day than a modern chimney. You'll hear coughing everywhere. Polite coughs, hacking coughs, and coughing that sounds like betrayal. It's the unofficial background soundtrack of Victorian life, a persistent chorus of people expelling their internal organs in rhythmic spurts of societal wheezing. A well-placed cough in the 1870s could mean many things. Good evening, I'm dying. Or, the air has once again betrayed me. Step outside, and you're immediately hit with what scientists would call inhospitable airborne particulate matter and what Victorians called weather. The fog doesn't just sit in the air, it crawls into it. You breathe in and feel the soot land softly in your throat like a tiny, soot-covered ballerina who hates you. The particles aren't just pollution, they're seasoning. You hear a baker across the street cough into his apron. A child selling matches hacks in sync with the clatter of his footsteps. A man next to a lamppost lets out a coughing fit, so violent it sounds like he's trying to summon something from another dimension. This is not a sign of acute illness. This is just Tuesday. Even indoors, there's no escape. Coal fires warm the room, barely. But they also generously donate a plume of throat-clogging smoke to the ambience. Chimneys are never quite efficient. The air inside is dry, smoky, and tinged with damp mold. You're essentially living inside a well-insulated lung hazard. You cough. Your spouse coughs. The dog coughs. You're not sure if dogs are supposed to do that, but no one's well enough to look into it. It becomes normal, a tickle in the back of your throat that never goes away. You stop acknowledging it after a while. It's like blinking, constant, involuntary, and mildly unsettling when you actually think about it. Coughs were even classified, unofficially, by type. There's the gentle, societal cough, used to excuse oneself from a room without admitting you need to flee to the outhouse. There's the violent, wet cough, usually heard from the corner of the workhouse dormitory, where someone is slowly turning into a ghost. Then there's the mystery cough, which has lingered for 7 years, hasn't killed anyone yet, and is treated exclusively with brandy and denial. And let's not forget tuberculosis, the reigning queen of Victorian afflictions. Known romantically as consumption, because it consumes you slowly, dramatically, and with artistic flair, TB was everywhere. Pale skin, delicate features, constant coughing. You weren't sick, you were fashionable. Half the poets had it. Several of the painters, at least 1/3 of all women in literature. It was the ultimate slow burn. Doctors prescribed fresh air, which is a bit ironic considering the entire city's atmosphere was a breathable coal deposit. Some recommended moving to the countryside, which, while slightly less polluted, still featured plenty of chimney smoke, peat fires, and an enthusiastic lack of ventilation. Cough drops existed, sort of, made of sugar, menthol, and occasionally opium. But mostly you just toughed it out, or wheezed it out, or died dramatically in a coughing fit, while writing sad poetry by candlelight. The lungs of a Victorian city dweller were textured. Smokers, non-smokers, children, the elderly. Everyone had that same dry rasp, that occasional wet gurgle, that 3 a.m. hacking session that could rattle the rafters. And people just lived with it. Because when the air you breathe is as thick as stew and smells like wet horse and chimney, coughing isn't a symptom. It's a civic duty. So yes, you're coughing, and so is everyone else. Welcome to the grand symphony of Victorian life, performed in bronchial harmony. Now, take a sip of something syrupy, close your soot-seasoned eyes, and get ready, because the next breath might be better, or not. But we'll pretend, just like they did. Behind the jokes lies a grim reality. Opium was cheap, deadly, and widely given. Many infants never woke up from their medicated sleep. Let's take a quiet breath here, or try to, through the fog of soot and sadness. Because beneath the quirky packaging and quaint names like soothing syrup and infant's comfort drops was something far darker. Victorian parenting wasn't just exhausting, it was risky. Especially if you were small, loud, and teething. It's the end of a long day. The baby is crying again. The mother is exhausted, overworked, and trying to manage 4 other children. A boiling pot of laundry, a leaky roof, and the slow realization that nobody's coming to help. The only thing in abundance is noise, and poverty, and syrup. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup is within reach. It promises peace. It delivers silence. It also contains morphine. The label doesn't warn about dosage. It recommends frequent use. Half a teaspoon for infants under 6 months, it says, as if infants and adult horses share pharmacological profiles. And many parents, often without formal education or access to better alternatives, trust it, because the baby stops crying. They fall asleep. Finally, they sleep. But sometimes, they don't wake up. Victorian records list childhood deaths under vague terms. Failure to thrive, infant wasting, crib death. Words designed to soften the blow, to make it feel like fate instead of chemistry. But behind those words were cases of accidental overdose, not out of malice, out of desperation, out of exhaustion, out of an era where parenting was done in dim light with half-truths and bottles of hope laced with poison. Opium was everywhere. In teething mixtures, in gripe water, in cough syrups. It was considered gentle. Doctors recommended it. Pharmacists handed it over with a nod. Advertisements boasted about how well it soothed restless infants, quiet children, grateful mothers. One ad proudly declared, which sounds like a 19th century horror movie tagline. And it wasn't just the syrup. Infants slept in shared beds with exhausted parents, sometimes under layers of heavy blankets and beside open flames. Homes were cramped. Air was thick. Sanitation was a rumor. Malnutrition was common. All these factors fed into the brutal statistics. In industrial cities like Manchester and London, up to 1 in 3 children didn't make it to their 5th birthday. That's not just a number. That's every parent carrying hope in one arm and fear in the other. That's naming children only when they passed their 1st birthday, because superstition mixed with heartbreak. That's having a drawer of baby clothes you don't mention. That's the silent seat at dinner. And it wasn't evenly distributed. The poorer you were, the worse the odds. The worse, in wealthier homes, there was better food, cleaner air, and maybe even a doctor with an actual education. But in working-class homes, mothers often had no choice. They worked, they scrubbed, they endured. And when the baby cried at 2 a.m., and again at 3, and again at 4, they reached for the bottle. Because what else was there? There were no social services, no health visitors, no pediatricians, just the apothecary, the midwife who might live 3 streets over, and a neighborhood filled with mothers doing the best they could in impossible conditions. Some tried to spread awareness. Reformers wrote books. Nurses advocated against the use of opiates. But change was slow. It always is, when profit and habit are stronger than grief. So tonight, as you listen to the rain or the hum of your fan, maybe pause, just for a second, for those babies, for those mothers, for all the lives that passed quietly in the night, under the weight of well-meaning doses and unbearable fatigue. This is history, yes. But it's also heartache, wrapped in lace, sealed with a cork. Tomorrow, the child may cry again. But tonight, the house is quiet, too quiet. And that's the part no one put on the label. You crawl into bed, muscles aching, lungs full of Victorian air, and ears ringing from street noise. As you settle under the heavy quilt, you finally understand why everyone relied on opium to sleep. The quilt is thick, scratchy, and smells faintly of smoke, starch, and a decade's worth of sleep. You're not even sure it's fabric anymore. It might just be compressed dust held together by willpower and lard soap. But none of that matters. You've made it through another day in Victorian Britain. Barely. Your body feels like it's been through several minor accidents. And that's just from walking to the bakery and dodging a suspicious puddle that hissed when you passed. Every joint creaks. Every muscle aches. You're lying in a bed that's more uneven than a gravel road. But at this point, you'd happily fall asleep on a church pew if it meant closing your eyes and escaping the coal-scented madness. You cough. Of course. Because the air inside your home is just slightly less toxic than the air outside, but only because the windows are stuck shut, and the chimney occasionally backs up like it's trying to kill you. The blanket traps the warmth, yes, but also a sense of mild claustrophobia. You feel like a historical lasagna. One layer of human, one layer of itchy wool, one layer of sadness. You try to shift into a more comfortable position, but the mattress groans like it's been personally insulted. It's stuffed with straw, horsehair, or possibly the ghosts of previous tenants. Whatever it is, it pokes you in exactly the same spot every single night, like it knows your secrets. Outside, the The city refuses to sleep. There's a clatter in the alley, followed by a voice yelling about fish, or possibly vengeance. Somewhere a baby is crying, which may be a local child or a fox with poor manners. Either way, it's unsettling. You pull the blanket up to your chin and try not to think about what's nesting in the wall behind you. Your stomach grumbles. Dinner was mostly broth and suspicion, and your one slice of bread now feels like a practical joke. You're not hungry so much as vaguely betrayed by food in general. But sleep demands obedience, and hunger is a distant second to your desire to pass out for 8 uninterrupted hours, or, let's be honest, 4 at best. You glance at the tiny bedside table. There it is. The bottle. Dark glass. Worn label. The same syrup your mother gave you. The same syrup you gave your child earlier. A thick, amber-colored liquid that smells like candy and colonialism. Just 1 spoonful, and you'll sleep like a decorative urn. But you hesitate. You've been good lately. You've rationed it. Tried to survive on sheer exhaustion. Still, tonight has pushed you. You've inhaled more soot than is medically advisable. You've seen a man throw a shoe at a lamplighter. You've learned, against your will, that your roof leaks directly onto your pillow. So you take the spoon. Pour just a bit. Let the syrup coat your tongue in molasses and mild oblivion. It warms your chest, dulls your thoughts, and wraps you in a fuzzy, floaty sort of peace. You understand now, truly, why Victorians used it so liberally. It doesn't solve anything, but it softens the edges. Your breath slows, your eyelids get heavy. The cough recedes. The weight of the day melts into the mattress. Outside, the street gas lamps flicker behind thin curtains. Inside, your candle burns low, and the shadows dance softly on the ceiling. The fire pops once, then settles. And you sleep. Not because things are good, but because you've survived them. Good night. 1872. Try not to catch fire before morning. Children's playtime is simple and slightly hazardous. The top toys are tin soldiers, slingshots, marbles, and anything with enough lead paint to make a modern parent faint. Every game ends with a bruise, a scolding, or an impromptu nap brought on by the soothing syrup just in case. Victorian fun isn't about screen time, enrichment programs, or playdates organized by people named Claire. No, Victorian playtime is chaos dressed up as wholesome entertainment. If it clatters, bruises, or potentially poisons you, it's a toy. Your favorite pastime? A game called Catch the Rat, which involves chasing actual rodents with a broom until one of you passes out. There's also Stick and Hoop, which is literally just a stick and a hoop, and somehow manages to be thrilling when your other entertainment options include sweeping the stoop or counting coal chunks. If you're lucky enough to have actual toys, they're made of metal, sharp corners, and a hearty dose of lead-based paint in cheerful colors like toxic green and Why Are My Teeth Falling Out? Your tin soldier collection doubles as an army and a tetanus delivery system. Your porcelain doll stares at you through slightly cracked eyes like it remembers your past lives and is disappointed in them. Marbles are huge. Not emotionally. Literally. These things could dent wood. You carry them in a pouch like a tiny Victorian bandit. Lose one, and a sibling will absolutely pretend not to have taken it while hiding it in their sock for 3 years. And let's not forget slingshots. Ah, yes, the traditional tool of both mischief and dental damage. You use them to aim at fence posts, cats, chimney sweeps, and each other's heads. No one wins, but someone always ends up crying, which is promptly treated with a teaspoon of opium syrup and a brisk, dismissive pat on the back. Girls' toys are no better. Tiny tea sets made of unglazed ceramic, lace-trimmed choking hazards, and dolls stuffed with sawdust and dreams. Half of playtime involves pretending to cook, using actual fire, or practicing future housework with child-sized brooms, which are just brooms. There is no distinction. You're not playing house. You're rehearsing for indentured domestic service. Outdoor play is pure anarchy. You roam the streets in packs, shouting half-invented rules for games no adult understands. Kick the can turns into a full-contact sport. Hopscotch is played on cobblestones with broken chalk and enthusiasm, and at least once a day, someone falls into something that was definitely not meant to be fallen into, such as a ditch, a puddle of suspicious origin, or a coal cart. Clothing is no help. Your boots are stiff, your socks are uneven, and your knickers ride up aggressively. You run like you're being chased by bees, mostly because you often are. There's no sunscreen, no helmets, and no adult supervision beyond the occasional neighbor yelling "not near the horses." Injuries are part of the fun. Scraped knees, bloodied noses, and the occasional mystery rash are worn like badges of honor. Medical attention is optional, and usually takes the form of dabbing something with vinegar, wrapping it in cloth, and giving you another spoonful of soothing, something to quiet the complaints. Parents pretend to watch from windows, but mostly they're just relieved you're outside and not actively breaking something indoors. If you make it through a game without crying or breaking furniture, you're considered emotionally stable. If not, well, nap time and narcotics await. Eventually, you wander back inside, bruised, covered in mysterious stains, and faintly glowing from whatever was in the paint on your toys. You sit quietly in the corner, chewing on a sugar stick that might be 40% opiate, and feel a gentle fog roll into your brain. Playtime is over. For now. Next up, sibling rivalry, Victorian style, featuring hair-pulling, frog-related pranks, and the eternal battle for the last drop of syrup. You and your siblings battle for supremacy using ancient methods. Hair-pulling, foot-stomping, and elaborate pranks involving frogs in nightgowns. Arguments over who gets the good pillow are swiftly solved by a parent with a bottle of calming tonic and the phrase, "You'll both sleep it off." In the great theatre of Victorian family life, no drama was more persistent or more violent than sibling rivalry. You weren't just brothers and sisters. You were cohabitants in a domestic gladiator ring, vying for limited resources, space, food, affection, and access to the single pillow in the house that didn't smell like mildew and betrayal. There is no privacy. Bedrooms are shared. Beds are shared. Sometimes even clothing is shared, though never willingly. Boundaries are theoretical. If one sibling rolls over in their sleep, another gets elbowed in the spleen. If someone breathes too loudly, war is declared. A line is drawn in the straw mattress with a stick, and immediately crossed out of spite. Most disagreements begin small. A stolen button, a crayon that no one remembers owning, a particularly crusty piece of bread that was unofficially claimed. But they escalate with remarkable speed. A poke becomes a shove. A shove becomes a slap. Then someone screams, someone bleeds, and someone else hides behind the curtain, clutching a pair of scissors and a deeply suspicious expression. The pranks are legendary. Frogs in nightgowns, classic. Putting soot in someone's boots, timeless. Swapping a teaspoon of jam for a teaspoon of mustard, masterful. You once replaced your sister's beloved doll's eyes with raisins. It took her weeks to forgive you, and even longer to sleep in the same room. You stage elaborate plots like tiny Dickensian supervillains. You form secret alliances. You betray those alliances before tea. Everything is a battlefield. Who gets the top bunk? Who gets the extra blanket? Who got more syrup last night? And who's owed a spoonful today? You count. You always count. And speaking of syrup, yes, the great equalizer. Every child knows that one spoonful of soothing syrup before bed means sleep comes quickly and dreams arrive like a velvet fog. The battle isn't over whether to take it. The battle is over who gets more. You eye the bottle. So does your sibling. One of you fakes a cough. The other fakes a seizure. A third, younger sibling simply starts screaming preemptively, just to get ahead of the curve. Your mother sighs, uncorks the bottle, and hands it out with clinical precision, like a bartender at the world's saddest pub. Enough, she says. You'll both sleep it off. And you will, because once the syrup kicks in, the rage melts. The bitterness dulls. The frog in the nightgown starts to seem funny rather than traumatic. You lie there, side by side, like two tiny hurricanes powered down for the night. Occasionally, there are moments of truce. When the thunder rattles the windows, when the wind howls through the drafty bricks, you inch closer, just a little. You pretend you're not scared. They pretend they didn't notice. You share the blanket, if only because it's stuck to both of you now. Peace, like the quiet before dawn, is brief. But it counts. Because even amid the squabbles and sabotage, you're in this together. Siblings in survival, teammates in torment, partners in pranks and pillow theft. Tomorrow, you'll fight again, over something petty and pointless and utterly important. But tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy and the syrup hushes the last of your thoughts, you drift off next to the sibling you just tried to bite. And in the Victorian tradition of all things mildly tragic and deeply absurd, that's just how love works. Bath night arrives with dread and a faint whiff of lye soap. Water is hauled from the kitchen, dumped into a tin tub, and reused by everyone in the house in order of social hierarchy. Spoiler, you're last. By the end, you're cleaner, colder, and almost ready to trade it all for another spoonful of syrup. You hear the phrase bath night and your soul winces. It's not spa evening or personal care ritual. No lavender candles. No relaxing music. Just a dented tin tub dragged in from wherever it was last abandoned and a communal sense of obligation. It's Saturday. Your body smells like coal smoke and resentment, and it's time to confront water in its most punishing form, lukewarm and judging you. The process begins early. Water is boiled over the stove in kettles that squeal like they resent the task. Several buckets are involved. So is at least one minor burn. The water is then hauled across the house, carefully, slowly, and always with someone yelling, "Mind the rug," and poured into the tub, which now sits proudly in the middle of the kitchen like a metal coffin full of regret. First in is the patriarch, not because he needs it most, but because Victorian values are built on the principle that rank beats grime. He lowers himself in with a grunt, grumbles about lumbago, and sloshes water everywhere. He spends a suspicious amount of time in there. When he gets out, the water is slightly greyer, significantly sadder, and roughly 4 degrees colder. Then comes Mother, who bathes with brisk efficiency and a visible scowl. She does not luxuriate. She scrubs like she's trying to erase the week. You hear the slap of lye soap against skin and the occasional muttered curse. She emerges in a fog of steam and fury. Then the children begin to cycle through, one by one, like contestants in a damp endurance competition. Each bathes in the water left behind by the previous sibling, meaning by the time it's your turn, the tub looks like Victorian soup, a murky broth of sweat, soap, crumbs, and possibly a button that came loose in the chaos. You sit on the edge, staring into the murky depths like a soldier contemplating battle. Someone offers you a bar of soap the size of a playing card and twice as slippery. You slide in. The water hits your skin with all the warmth of a disappointed handshake. You gasp. You shiver. You consider whether staying dirty might have actually been the smarter health decision. Your knees don't fit. Your back cramps. Your siblings heckle you from across the room. It's a group activity now. You splash water over yourself, which only seems to rearrange the grime. You scrub with a cloth that may once have been white, but is now the exact color of Victorian despair. You dunk your head and emerge with soap in your eyes, and one less hair ribbon than you started with. Once you're clean, a relative term, you step out onto the cold floorboards, your feet instantly freezing. There's no towel, just a rag that smells vaguely like onions and compromise. You pat yourself dry while your teeth chatter like castanets. There's no conditioner, no lotion. Your hair is a rat's nest of soap residue and sorrow, but at least you've survived. You're clean. Kind of. You smell like carbolic soap and trauma. And so ends bath night. A full-body experience in humility, hypothermia, and hygiene. You crawl into your nightshirt, reach for your share of syrup, and wonder quietly why people in old paintings always looked so miserable. Now you know. They'd just had a bath, and they were still waiting for it to be your turn. A visit to Grandma's is a masterclass in home medicine. She insists on treating your sniffles with onion poultices, mustard plasters, and exactly one sticky lozenge that tastes like regret and probable narcotics. She's sweet, stern, and convinced she can cure anything with a hot compress and a side-eye. You arrive at Grandma's house with a cough and a sense of dread. The house smells like lavender, camphor, and something ominously herbal. She greets you at the door with a hug that could crack ribs and immediately declares, "You look pale," which in Victorian terms means you're now enrolled in a 48-hour medical boot camp supervised by someone who thinks arsenic was just misunderstood. She leads you inside, past the ticking grandfather clock that definitely judges your posture, and into the parlor, a room filled with lace doilies, porcelain figurines, and furniture that predates your own parents. You sit, politely, on a chair that squeaks like it's remembering every bottom that ever sat on it. The fire crackles. You sneeze. "Ah," Grandma says. "It's the damp in your lungs." Before you can respond, she's already bustling into her cabinet of cures. It's less of a medicine chest and more of a witch's starter kit. There are brown bottles, tins with peeling labels, and little paper parcels tied up with string. Every drawer contains something that smells like it could either heal you or hex you. First up, the onion poultice. She smashes a perfectly innocent onion, wraps it in cheesecloth, and slaps it onto your chest like it's an overdue punishment. The smell is aggressive. Your eyes water. Your skin begins to tingle, which she insists is a good sign. You're pretty sure it's not. Next, the mustard plaster. This is applied with the care of someone spreading concrete over a haunted floorboard. It's hot. Then it's too hot. Then you're not sure if your skin is burning or just disassociating. She nods approvingly while you sit there, steaming and afraid to move. "It draws out the sickness," she says. You suspect it's drawing out your will to live. She offers you a lozenge, unwrapped from a yellowed bit of paper and sticky enough to catch lint from across the room. You pop it in your mouth. It tastes like licorice, sadness, and a hint of expired morphine. It begins numbing your tongue immediately. You can't feel your mouth. You're not even sure you have a mouth anymore. Grandma smiles. That's the good stuff. There's also elderberry syrup, poured from a bottle that hasn't been cleaned since the Crimean War. It's thick. It's tart. It probably contains actual alcohol. You take it anyway. because Grandma is now holding your hand and telling you a story about how this exact mixture saved your uncle from melancholia and worms. Her philosophy of medicine is simple. If it smells foul, tastes worse, and makes your skin tingle, it must be working. You aren't so much recovering as you are being scared back to health by sheer therapeutic intimidation. At one point, she places a hand on your forehead, frowns deeply, and mutters, "Your humors are imbalanced." You nod. This is not a woman you argue with. This is a woman who once cured a fever by burying her shoes under the full moon and swearing loudly at the chimney. Despite the suffering, or possibly because of it, you do start to feel better, or at least more distracted from your symptoms by the barrage of conflicting sensations. The onion steam has cleared your sinuses. The mustard blistering has focused your attention. The lozenge has sent you into a narcotic haze. Eventually, you fall asleep on her parlor sofa, wrapped in a knitted afghan that smells like mothballs and victory. Grandma watches over you, sipping her own mysterious tonic, ready to fight your germs with equal parts science, superstition, and sheer personal force. Victorian healing, after all, isn't about comfort. It's about survival through confusion. And Grandma's never lost a patient, mostly because they're too scared to die on her watch. As darkness settles, the house creaks ominously. Older siblings whisper terrifying ghost stories. The wind howls through single-pane windows, and the only thing standing between you and existential terror is a parent with a lantern and another measured spoonful of sleeping syrup. Pleasant dreams. The night in Victorian England doesn't so much fall as descend ominously, like a thick curtain soaked in fog and mild dread. Once the last candle is snuffed and the fire reduced to glowing embers, the house transforms. The wooden floors, silent by day, now creak like they've just remembered something terrible. The walls groan. Pipes moan. Every draft carries the subtle whisper of ghosts with unfinished business and poor social skills. You're tucked into a narrow bed, the mattress as thin as a gilt, trip, beneath a heavy wool blanket that smells of mildew, mothballs, and possibly unresolved trauma. The only light is the moon peeking weakly through the gauzy curtain, casting spooky shadows on the wallpaper, which, in your half-awake state, absolutely appears to be moving. But the true horror? Your older sibling, who, knowing full well that you're still impressionable and running on a combination of cough and syrup fumes, decides now is the perfect time to whisper, "Did you hear about the girl who was buried alive under our floorboards?" Ah, yes. The bedtime tradition of family-friendly psychological warfare. They launch into a tale about a pale Victorian child, not unlike you, who coughed herself into the grave, only to be heard scratching at the wood 3 nights later. You gasp. They smile. The wind knocks a shutter loose. And you die a little inside. You clutch the edge of your blanket like it's a shield. Every creak becomes a footstep. Every gust of wind is surely a banshee. Every rafter groan is a ghost, dragging its chains like it's auditioning for a Dickens play. You try to cry quietly, but Victorian crying is tricky. If you're too loud, you risk disturbing your parents, who are trying to get some sleep before facing another day of soot, soup, and minor plagues. If you're too quiet, your sibling might start round 2 of bedtime horror hour, now featuring tales of shadowy strangers and haunted chamber pots. Eventually, your distress reaches the appropriate decibel to trigger parental intervention. A door creaks open. You hear the slow, deliberate shuffle of feet wrapped in wool socks. Then, through the gloom, your mother appears, carrying a flickering oil lamp and an expression that says she's too tired for nonsense but morally obligated to provide comfort. "What's the matter now?" she sighs, setting the lamp on the dresser. You mutter something about ghosts. Floor scratching. A child who may or may not live beneath your bed. Your mother doesn't roll her eyes because she's Victorian and therefore emotionally composed, but she thinks about it. Then she pulls out the answer to all your fears. The syrup. The bottle glints in the firelight. The spoon appears. A warm, thick, mildly narcotic hug in liquid form is delivered straight to your mouth. There now, she says. Enough of that. And honestly, she's not wrong. The syrup dulls the edges of the shadows. It slows your pulse. The ghost stories lose their bite. The wallpaper stops twitching. And even your sibling begins to blur into harmlessness. You sink deeper into the mattress, the room spinning slightly but softly. Outside, the wind continues to howl. The walls still creak. Somewhere, a horse coughs. But inside your syrup-clouded mind, none of it matters. You are floating in the quiet fog of chemical comfort and maternal side eyes. Tomorrow, your sibling will prank you again. The ghosts will be back. The floorboards will whisper secrets. But for now, you are warm. You are safe. And if a ghost does appear, you'll be too tranquilized to care. As we drift to the end of this Victorian fever dream, take a slow breath and let the soot settle. You've just survived an entire day in the 19th century. One filled with coal dust, creaking floorboards, dangerously enthusiastic pharmacists, and enough opium-laced children's remedies to tranquilize a yak. And somehow, through all the fog, fumes, and wildly questionable medical decisions, you made it here to bedtime, ideally without having consumed any narcotic syrup along the way. Tonight you walked through nursery rooms scented with laudanum and lavender. You watched parents lovingly spoon soothing cordial into their babies' mouths. Because everyone was tired and nobody had invented self-care yet. You trudged through smoggy streets where horses did whatever they wanted. Children worked jobs that would violate every regulation today. And candy shops doubled as mildly dangerous pharmacies. You even endured Victorian home remedies, mustard plasters, onion poultices, and those candies with ingredients that would now require a small legal team. And yet, for all the strangeness people persisted, Victorian families loved fiercely, even if their medical practices looked like a chaotic science experiment. Parents tried their best with what they had, a bottle of syrup, a prayer, and a hope that the wallpaper wasn't poisoning anyone. Children played, laughed, helped with chores, and somehow grew up, despite an environment that seemed designed by a committee of sleep-deprived ghosts. So tonight, as you rest in your clean, warm bed with blankets that aren't stuffed with horsehair, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the generations before you, to the exhausted mothers, soot-covered fathers, and slightly dazed children who lived through an era where medicine meant try this and see if you wake up on time tomorrow. They endured coal smoke, perilous remedies, and winters colder than your ex's texts. And their survival, chaotic and unmedicated by today's standards, eventually made your world possible. Because history, in all its bizarre and uncomfortable glory, reminds us of something comforting. Humans are stubborn, hopeful, and endlessly inventive, even when they really shouldn't be. We learn, we adapt, and in every era, we find ways to care for each other, sometimes with warm soup, sometimes with questionable syrups, and sometimes with a good story before bed. So let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath slow. Let the last flickers of Victorian chaos fade into the background. You're safe, warm, and fully in a century that finally figured out dosing guidelines. Sleep well, time traveler. May your dreams be calm, cozy, and blissfully free of opium candy.